Welcome to Real Gaijin, unveiling the real Japan, an American expat's inside look. Now it's time for another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts. Summarized podcast. Good morning to everyone listening from Japan. Good late night from everyone in London. And good evening for people on the East Coast of North America, and good afternoon for everyone tuning in from the West Coast of North America. We tried to pick a time that would be reasonably convenient for just about everybody, so thank you very much. Once again, my name is Mark Kennedy. I'm the host of the Real Gaijin podcast and also Substack. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce a real good friend of mine, Kevin McAuliffe, whom I'll introduce himself in just a second, but he has literally been there, done that. So a few weeks ago, you might recall, we had a great opportunity to interview a young entrepreneur in his early 20s who just started a startup company in Tokyo named Arjun Sharma. Arjun is continuing to do well and is anticipating going to San Francisco for a very interesting entrepreneur scholarship coming up. Today, though, what we've got in store for you is a totally different perspective. Someone that did the same thing like Arjun is doing right now, but way back in 1994, which might actually be well before many of our listeners were actually even born. So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Kevin McAuliffe. Kevin is a good friend and has been at this for a long time. So, Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be on your show.
Oh, good. Okay.
Number three on your show. I feel honored.
Well, we're starting slowly but surely. And by the way, thanks for that segue. Real Gaijin, just so you know, means real foreigner. So Gaijin is an informal term for the word foreigner. A more formal one is Gaikokujin. But what we're trying to showcase on this show and with this Substack is the contributions of resident foreigners in Japan. And we're now numbering a lot. As you might have noticed from a recent post, there are now 3.7 million plus real Gaijin in Japan, which is huge. That's about 3% of the total population. And we're on our way to actually exceed estimates of 10% of the population of Japan by the year 2067, which is the Japanese government's official estimate. I have a feeling that it's going to go over 10% before that. What I want to do is introduce not all 3.7 million of us, but at least a few of us that have made Japan home for a while and learn a little bit more about what has inspired these people and also how they can be inspiring for you. So today we have Kevin, and just as a little background, Kevin and I are actually personal friends. Our sons went to school, multiple schools together, and are still very close friends. So we see each other every once in a while. Kevin, the proverbial where from, right? You're asked this question all the time. Where are you from? How did you get to Japan?
Okay, it's a long story. It's a story of keep going west, I guess, until I get to the east. So I was born in the Boston area, but I left. My family decided to leave fairly early and moved to Arizona. So I spent my first 13 years in Arizona, in Tucson, the high desert area, and then moved to California, where I went through junior high school, and university. During my university days, this goes way back to the late 60s, early 70s. I was, as many of you know, it was Vietnam War days, and for Americans, you had a draft number, and my draft number was 3, which meant that I would be going pretty quickly if I didn't have a deferment. But university students had deferments, and so I was able to. If I stayed in university at least for 4 years, I didn't have to go. And during that time, both my brothers were drafted and did go into the military, and one of them was based in Japan, and he invited me out for the summer. So the summer of 1971 is when I first went to Japan. So I'd been to border cities in Canada and Mexico over the years, but never outside of the US. And so this was my first trip, and I was 19 years old. And we flew to Japan. My brother picked me up. I stayed with him for a couple of weeks. And during that time, he told me about an opportunity a friend of his, an international school teacher in Japan, had organized this tour of about 30 boys between 10 and 15 years old, a tour of Asia. And but unfortunately, the tour had been arranged for months ahead of time, and he had international school teachers as the counselors because these were young boys. And one of them dropped out 2 weeks before the trip was going. So he was desperate and desperate enough to take a 19-year-old as one
That's pretty
counselor.
desperate.
Yeah. Well, actually, I had to go through a sort of a test. So the test was I had to. We met with the boys. The guy running the program, myself. We met with the boys in a place up by St. Mary's in Tokyo. People who know the Tokyo area, and along the river, the river there, and we were going to play baseball. So there were about 15 boys and myself and the person that was running the program. Now, take it, I had been in Japan for about 10 days, so I wasn't very knowledgeable about things, about how to get around. But anyway, we arrive and he unloads the baseball mitts and the baseballs and realizes that he forgot the bat.
Ah,
So he said to me, "Okay, I'm going to go back to the school and get the bat. You take care of the kids." So here's about 18 kids between 10 and 15 years old. And so I had the fortuitous idea to recommend we play baseball, but without the bat. So we would throw the ball and then we'd play the game. So in the half hour or 45 minutes he was away and probably thinking that the whole group was being disintegrating and nothing happening. Well, he came back and he was amazed to see we're all playing baseball and we had a great time. And so he accepted me and I went on this trip. And
wow.
the trip was 1 month, and we flew to Hong Kong for a couple of days, and then went to Bangkok, and then on to New Delhi, and
Oh,
then up to Srinagar, which well, we went to Agra, which is where the Taj Mahal is as well. Then up to Srinagar, which is up in the Kashmir area of the Himalayas, and which you may know is a very is an area with a lot of conflict, and it was those days, and it still is today. And then back to flew into Kuala Lumpur and went to Penang, and then Singapore, and then to Manila and Baguio, which is a town outside of Manila, and then back to Tokyo. So it changed my life. It opened up my eyes to a world that was far, far different than what I had grown up in, and languages and cultures and customs. And I said, I've got to get back here. I've got to come back to Asia. And so that was probably the impetus of getting me moving away from a career in the U.S. to a career in Asia.
that is quite a story. I don't think I remember hearing the full story here, and this was all during the Vietnam War.
Yes, this is Vietnam War. Yes.
Okay. Well, all right. So how did you get back to Japan?
So I was quite interested. So in coming back to Asia. So and I didn't really have a good idea what I wanted to do after graduation. So the summer of my junior year, I also came back to Japan, and my brother introduced me to. He had left the Navy and stayed in Japan, and he introduced me to this a great business opportunity in Japan of basically doing copy editing or copywriting. In those days, it was very common for you had to have a lot of things into English, and you had Japanese translators that were great at translating in a way English, but didn't have any kind of fluency in the language. So the translations, which you even see today, sometimes had a lot of mistakes in it. So I was tasked with rewriting those. There were various kinds. There were booklets. I wrote things for Nissan. I was writing for Nissan. All of their guidebooks for their cars. They went around the world. I did some of the English ones, and so just various kinds of work like that, and also a little bit of English teaching as well.
Mm.
And then when I graduated, I came back again to Japan. So in 1973, I arrived in Japan, ready to start a career.
All right. Now, I remember hearing about one of the more unusual experiences was running a hot spring in Nozawa Onsen, right?
Yes, yes. So yes, that's true. I was interested in skiing. Enjoyed skiing, and my brother enjoyed skiing as well. And he had met a inn owner of a Japanese ryokan, which is a traditional Japanese inn. He had uh, he had met this fellow that was kind of interested in international things. So my brother actually the previous winter had spent some time up there, and so when I came back, I decided I would go up there for a while for the winter, and went up and worked in the inn. And so that it's a little bit different today in some places, but the Japanese inn in those days would serve the breakfast and dinner, and lunch you get on your own. So my work was I would help prepare breakfast and serve breakfast and clean up afterwards, and then and also people in your rooms to take the futons that people slept on and put those away. And then I would go skiing. So from about 10 o'clock, I'd go skiing until 3 o'clock. And then I'd come back and take a bath, a hot spring bath, and start work at 4 o'clock. And then from 4 to about 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock was basically the same thing again, of laying out the futons again for people to sleep in, and preparing the meal and serving the meal and picking up afterwards and cleaning up. And then I would go out on the town with see friends and enjoy the village life.
Pretty nice. So rinse, wash, and repeat here.
That's right. That's
All
right.
of- okay. So, what's interesting hearing you say that is it dovetails into some of the advice that Arjun gave a few weeks ago, which was if you're interested in Japan or in Asia in general, first get yourself over here, do something. And my goodness, you've certainly found something. So that takes us from around 1973 to 1994. What exactly happened in that 20-year span, though? I'm sure it was more than just working in Nozawa Onsen.
Yes, it was. So I decided that we had an opportunity to go to New Zealand. My brother and I decided that we had skied in Japan, so why don't we go down to New Zealand? Because seasons are opposite. We could have sort of a equivalent of endless winter, I guess, instead of endless summer. And although we had summer in Southeast Asia, traveling through Southeast Asia. So I went down to New Zealand and then repeated that twice. Actually, I came back to Japan, Nozawa. So I spent a couple of years in each place. In Nozawa, I was working in the inn, and in New Zealand, it was usually a bartender or a waiter job. And in those days, you didn't care too much about visas. Tourist
Ah,
seemed to allow you to do a lot of things. So I wasn't there working. It's gotten stricter over the years, but so I did that for a couple of years, and then ended up coming back to Japan and deciding that I wanted to do some writing work, and got a job as a correspondent for some European and American trade magazines in the consumer electronics area. For those old enough to remember, the mid to late 70s was the boom time for Japanese audio and video. So obviously there were great makers around the world, but Japanese speaker, stylus, uh, phonographs, the amplifiers, the makers of those were major players in the world market. So I was covering them, and also it was the very early days of the video, the battle between Sony and Matsushita over the what style we're going to use for videotapes, which people don't use anymore. And also, I saw the first CD, a Philips, one of the first CDs. A Philips engineer was in Tokyo and I met with him, and he said, "Come up to my room, and I'll show you this new gadget." And it was the CD. And this is all in that period, about a 3-year period from 1977 to 1980. So I was covering the market. I was able to meet people like Matsushita, the elder Konosuke,
oh wow.
and although he wasn't in very good shape in those days, and many of the presidents and senior people in Sony, and and all the major JVC, all the major companies in those days. So it was a great experience, and was able to learn some Japanese in the process, and so it was a great opportunity.
Yeah, wow. And so, okay, now I know at some point you found your way to Hong Kong. How did that happen?
That's right. So the magazines I was working for, they had decided that they wanted to set up a new magazine in Hong Kong, and they wanted me to be the editor, publisher of that magazine.
Hmm.
So I moved down to Hong Kong and was there for about 2 weeks. And I got a call one day from a um, executive search person saying, we've heard about you. And I said, how'd you ever hear about me? I've been here too. No one, and the number, I was staying with my brother, no one would have known that number. So anyway, he called and said he was interested in interviewing me, and I did, and it was with Time Magazine. So I interviewed for an ad sales position for Time Magazine. So I ended up leaving the company I was with and joining Time, and I ended up working for Time for 6 years in Hong Kong.
Oh,
Initially in ad sales, and then later in circulation management, and I launched the in those days Fortune magazine. Fortune International was just launched, and I launched the Asia Pacific um, edition of that in Asia Pacific, which was my territory from basically Afghanistan to Korea to Australia. So I was covering
oh,
a lot of territory for 3 years, but it was a fantastic job.
sounds like it. That's great. And okay, but now you're back in Hong Kong. So how did you end up returning
So
to Japan again?
So, there's lots of instances that hit you in Japan, that anywhere in the world, your life, you're going to run across things where you have opportunities and things you're not even thinking about suddenly comes up. And whether you grab it or don't grab it, it really determines many directions. So I was meeting with, I'd been in Hong Kong for almost 6 years. And one of the senior people at Time Magazine was out in Hong Kong, and asked me, he said, you've been here a long time. We want you to come back to New York. And what are you looking to do? And I said, well, I was kind of interested in the job of a business manager for Time International. And he said, do you have an MBA? I said, what do I need an MBA for? I've been here 6 years doing, and the circulation job was heavy number business. And so he said to me, well, that's really a job for an MBA, but, we still look for other positions there. And it must have been a week later in the American Chamber of Commerce of magazine in Hong Kong, I saw a little tiny ad saying scholarships for Americans to get an MBA at USC, University of Southern California. And it's a 1 year MBA. It's sort of in those days it was very new, but an executive MBA. So it was a full-time immersion program for 1 year, and it would focus on Asia Pacific business as well as just a normal MBA. So I happened to go back. My parents were living in the LA area. I went back for that Christmas and went to USC and met the people there. And they said, "You're ideal. Just pass the graduate records exam, the GMATs, and which I did. And I went to USC for a year, which was a fantastic experience. In mid career, I was 33 or 34 years old when I went, and it was a great opportunity. If people have a chance, I encourage my own kids as well that it's great to have a few years under your belt in the real world before going on to graduate school. But there are people that have a very strong belief in what they want to do for the rest of their life, so they can go straight into graduate school. But for me, I had still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, so went to USC for a year, and fortunately, I had spoken to a friend of mine that was running one of the executive search companies in Hong Kong. And I said, I'm going there for a year. When should I start looking for a job? Because I had an opportunity. I was on leave of absence from Time, but it wasn't a guarantee. There wasn't a guaranteed position for me. And so I asked him, when should I start? He said, your first day. I said, yeah, but it's a year before I graduate. He said,
Good
it's
advice.
start your first day, and which I did. And so by the end of that year, I had several offers, and one of them was a job in Tokyo with Reuters.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Tech. So that's
Okay.
when I came, and that was actually 1987. So when I came back to
Oh,
Japan.
wow. Okay. Wow. That is quite, I mean, that's an extensive career just listening to that point. You said many things that resonated with me. I mean, number one, about, well, first of all, what you just said about immediately networking. That's great advice. Plus, taking a little bit of time, particularly people perhaps that are interested in Asia, and same thing with me. I didn't go back to graduate school, and I also went to get an MBA until several years. So I was about maybe about the same age as you were when I graduated. And I did it over 4 years, a little bit at a time, but it serves you well, and I noticed a pretty big difference between people in the classes that had less experience in the real world. So I'm sure you were able to leverage that. That's great. Wow, that is quite a story. And now, okay, so now you had an opportunity to work for Reuters. What were you doing for Reuters back in Japan then?
So initially, I was doing a sales and marketing job, and I was basically working with the. Well, let me explain. People that don't know Reuters that well. So it is a news agency. Well, it's been sold in recent years, but it's a news agency. It goes back to the 1860s of delivering news by pigeon in order. This is financial news in order to get a leg up on the market. So that's what they pride themselves on, is basically being very quick in their news. So I was in charge of selling selling the news to um, newspapers and also to the to TV stations. Let me get a water here.
Yeah. Huh. In Tokyo.
In Tokyo. So my initial job was actually to rewrite or to renegotiate several of our larger contracts,
Ah,
because they were done years and years ago, and the world was changing quickly. It was going electronic, and Reuters needed to have a lot of flexibility in how the news was used and information they had was used. Um, so I had my initial sort of position was actually negotiating with some of the major companies in Japan about the contracts Reuters had with them. And and this was a very interesting experience because I'd taken in a negotiation class when I was at USC. That was one of the core things you had to do
sure.
in the course I was in. And the professor there was very good, and he talked about negotiating around the world, and one of them was about Japan and how you have to play a certain role, and this is how Japanese negotiate. So I had this image in my mind about how Japanese negotiate, and of course the reality is, yeah, there were some of that, but there were some entirely different. And so
Mm,
there was all kinds of ways people negotiated, and it sort of stuck with me. And something I think is important for people that want to do business in Japan or come here is that there are stereotypes, and you do see that, but there's also great variation. So you need to sort of be flexible and your approach on things. So I had meetings. One of the meetings was with the Kyoto News, and and I met with one of their executive directors, and we would meet exactly halfway between the two companies. So the Kyoto office in those
geographically?
near the American Embassy, and we were in Kamiyacha. So we met at the Okura Hotel. We'd meet there about 2 o'clock in the afternoon when people had left, and we went up to one of the top rooms of the restaurants, and they let us alone. We sat there for 2 hours, and he would sort of give me some thoughts about what they were thinking, and I would give some thoughts about where we're thinking, and we would have a nice, pleasant meal, not a meal, but usually a coffee, and agree to meet again next week. And so that went about 3 or 4 weeks, and eventually we came to an agreement. And
Hmm.
then there was another called GG Press, which is
Mhm.
also a news agency here. And in that meeting, there were 12 people on their side. Every single division of GG Press was represented in those discussions.
And you
And
versus you.
I brought one of the people I was working with, so the
Ah,
two
okay.
of us were there. Um, and and then the third one was with Nikkei, and
Mm,
Nikkei Press. I was meeting a relatively junior person, and we were meeting. Actually, we met in the hallway. Kind of, there was a couple of seats that were in the hallway, people walking by, and we're negotiating, and it was like horse trading. And I was going, wait, this isn't how Japanese negotiate. But if he wants to do it, we can do it this way. So we did it, and I got a very favorable agreement. And 2 days later, I got a call from him saying, "I'm sorry, I can't. We can't do that." Which is something you hear. Japanese will never, once they agree to something, back out of it. But he wanted to back out of it, so we let him back out, and we got a little bit different deal. But so it was a great experience of learning in those three different processes. Is the differences in Japan, and also that you need to keep yourself very, very flexible and try to understand the different dynamics going on in the companies that you're with, because I guarantee you there's huge dynamics going on in each of those companies.
Yeah, well, three diverse ways of doing it. Very interesting. By the way, I have to ask you, thinking about the time frame here, this must have been the height of the bubble economy.
Yes, yes, that was it was well, yes and no. It was I had just joined Reuters in '87, and they had organized a trip around the world basically for their new hires. They had hired about 17 MBAs. This was a new thing for Reuters in those days. So I was one of them, probably the oldest of the group. And we went around the world. I was in London and on Black Friday.
Oh,
uh, and it amazed me because people weren't panicking, but a lot of the executives were not very happy because the stock prices were crashing, including all of the stocks they had in Reuters. So it was an interesting experience. Yes, it was. It was the peak time, and it was a time where Japanese, where what they said, like the area around the Imperial Palace was worth all of the property in California, and yeah, it was ridiculous times, and people were spending huge amounts of money for sort of trophy locations like golf courses or buildings in New York or paintings. And so, yes, and there was a sense of, I guess, of overconfidence. I started, because Japanese are very humble, but in those days, you started meeting people that sort of felt, well, Japan's not going to take over the world. But of course, it didn't last too long.
oh, yeah, that's right. But one thing that did last was your interest in Japan. And so you did this for Reuters for a few years, and then somehow you must have gotten the itch to start your own business.
Yes. So at the end of my time at Reuters, so Reuters, after I'd been there for 5 years, and they wanted me to move to New York, and they wanted me to run a project. Reuters in those days was interested in getting into the medical information business, and so I was tasked. I said, okay, but yeah, let me just take it from Tokyo initially. So I was in Tokyo and traveling basically to New York and London once or twice a month, and looking at how Reuters could enter the medical information business. And what I found was that so in those days, people that don't know the financial business, but financial information is very costly. And in those days in particular, Reuters had the monopoly basically on foreign exchange rates. So the banks would all feed their information, their buy and sell rates into Reuters, and Reuters would then send that out, combine it, and send that out to all the subscribers. So that's how foreign exchange was traded in those days. On the price, the prices were, it was between banks, but the prices were shown on the Reuters platform. And in those days, the price, if you wanted a Reuters platform in Tokyo, it was 600,000 yen a month, which was a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot.
But traders were making lots when they're trading millions and millions of dollars. So when I was doing the medical information business, we're doing these focus groups in places like Minneapolis and Texas and various other places. And you're listening to these doctors that are agonizing over spending. We're talking about medical information, patient records, and things like that. And how much you'd pay a month for this kind of service. And they go, $10 is kind of, I don't know if I could go. I've got $10. And I said, okay, there's no way. And I've seen the same thing in time as well. If you're really, really big, you're used to getting 600,000 yen a month for a terminal. Yeah, people can make money off $10 a month if you have enough doctors, but not a company that's used to getting that kind of money. And the same with when I was at Time, I proposed some magazines for them, and that were that would bring $2 or $3 million profit a year, and they sort of laughed. What? We spend that on a trip out to Asia. It's just you're talking about $600 million, then it starts making sense. So really big institutions don't do a good job of doing low cost mass market business unless they're geared for it. So in that and so about that time, I was approached by a friend of mine, old friend from Time Days in Hong Kong, and he knew someone in the U.S. that was wanted to start a business. Businesses in Asia, basically bringing low-priced Chinese goods into the market. And I came back to Japan, and I was looking at the prices of things, and I thought to myself, "Wow, you get low. Maybe Japanese will buy low-priced things." But people were saying in those days, "No, Japanese only want quality. Price doesn't matter. Quality is the sole issue." Because this is 1993, so it is still bubble time in a way, and so people were spending lots of money doing things that not just buying golf courses, but also spending lots of money on entertainment. And so I thought, okay, maybe there's a market here, and even if it doesn't have the highest quality, people still want price. So I agreed, and I left Reuters and started Newport in 1990. So I left Reuters the end of '93 and started Newport 2 weeks later.
Oh, okay. Jump right into it. And now you did this in partnership with two other people.
So the business model had a couple of aspects to it. There was a business. So I was hired really to run to sort of run the financial and the business side of the business, not the sales side. And they had a model in the U.S. where they were selling through sales agents, and had their own companies in different markets, and they would sell. So the main company would supply product on a consignment basis to these sales companies, and they in turn would sell in their area. And so that's the model that they wanted, that was expanding around Asia. And yeah, I didn't have any experience in the sales side of things. So they sent actually 3 people over to do that and set that up. And I set up Newport, which was going to be the importer, and basically sort of ensure that the quality of everything was done correctly, and ensure the money was got back to the companies that were buying the merchandise. So yeah, so that's what I did with them, and the other 3 people started up the sales offices.
Got it. And so, a little bit more specifically, what exactly were you importing from China and reselling in Japan?
So our first product, which was a huge success, was a 12-digit calculator. It's a little sort of a desktop calculator that has up to 12 digits. And in those days, if you went to a electronics store and bought a calculator, it was about 6,000 or 7,000 yen for a Citizen or Omron name to it. And we had brought in a calculator from China called Big Display, a no brand basically, and we were selling it for 1,500 yen.
Ah.
So 1/4 of the cost, and it sold very well. People said, because in those days, if you were starting in a company, they weren't giving you a computer, they're giving you a calculator. And so every April they had lots of calculators they needed to purchase for all the new employees.
Sure.
Calculator on your desk. And so yeah, we had a great business for a while, but of course you can't exist on one product. So we brought lots of other products in. Just basically a wide variety of consumer products, toys, and so plastic containers, and all kinds of things, stuffed animals, all kinds of products, and but selling at an inexpensive price. So people had been in Japan for a long time might remember at that same time a couple of other companies started that are now quite big. One is Don Quixote.
Mm.
So Don Quixote started around that time, and there was in a little lower line is the Daiso, selling the 100 yen. Though both were just getting started at that time, doing the same thing we were doing, but on a storefront basis. That they were having brick and mortar, and we were doing it more in pop-ups and things like that. Um, and then later on, people like Costco comes in. So we weren't able to stay in that sort of market that long, because it was just they were much better funded than I was, and they were building locations around the country. So we moved away from the sort of the variety of products we might call Zaka in some respects, so different kinds of product lines. So we moved to moving into branded goods or sales outsourcing for other companies that needed salespeople to sell their products and services. And that's what we do today.
Ah, okay, good. I'm glad you mentioned that. So, tell me a little bit more about Newport today. I mean, the size, what exactly you do, and your value proposition.
So we do, because now current exchange rates do about $20 million a year in sales. We have about 30 employees. Um, we have about 10, I think 10 or 11 customers, main suppliers of our products and services. So we do two kinds of business. One is selling product. So we represent a couple of brands. One is in actually Los Angeles area. It's a skincare brand called Dermalogica. So we do the consumer product marketing in Japan, consumer market in Japan, and also we have a nail product line which is made in New Jersey, but we have a different name we're using in Japan called Inkoko, and we also do some car products, car related products, cleaning products, and some are manufactured in the U.S. One product is manufactured in Australia. So those are our main product lines, and then we also work with quite a few Japanese companies to sell their services. We work with the largest milk company in Japan
Oh,
to sign up customers for their home delivery. So believe it or not, home delivery is alive and well in Japan of milk products. Um,
you're a milkman. Okay.
yes, we're a milkman. Yes, and also we have a water server company that we work with, signing up customers. We work with a British Japanese joint venture that does um, uh, renewable energy. So if you want renewable energy rather than gas or, or oil, we sign up customers for that. There's a streaming service we work with called Unext in Japan, which we sign up customers for them. So we do, those are the two main lines of businesses that we do. So we sign up customers or we sell product. And the product side, we sell through different channels, pop-ups, but also a lot of e-commerce and retail.
Wow, that is fairly diverse for a relatively small company, which has had a lot of success, though. Great. And so, all right, where do you see Newport heading in the future?
So I've had a very strong belief in that we need to be looking at our environmental impacts and our just general sustainability. There's also social aspects to it as well about how employees are treated and opportunities for growth and development. So we basically about 20 years ago we got our ISO 14001 certification, which is an environmental certification, and we've been keeping that active. We've been renewing that every year for the last 20, 22, 23 years, and in about 1916 or 17, sorry, 2016 or 17, they changed it a little bit to broaden it to make it more sustainable.
Hmm.
There's also some social and economic sides to it as well. And so we've been following that over the years. And so what I look for in my products and services is what's the environmental angle on this? How
Mm.
can we make it more sustainable? And of course, in our business practices, how can we make it more sustainable? And sustainability, we sort of look at three pillars of it. We look at environmental side of it. And we'll also look at an economic side. Obviously, if you're not making money, you're not going to stay in business, so you're not sustainable.
Mm.
And then there's the social side of it. What are we doing for our communities, for our employees? Are the opportunities there? Are people able to develop themselves and grow? So I think that's the direction I want to keep focusing on is the sustainability side, both in our product lineup, who we're representing, who we're working with, but also how we're operating as a company, how we're operating as a member of our community. We're quite involved. We got actually the Sustainability Award for Shikoku a couple of years ago, and we were the first company to ever get it. Up
Mm.
to then, it had all been sort of given to NGOs, and and also we work with them to volunteer activity at different senior homes and things like that. So we're keeping involved in cleanup activities as well, and so we're trying to be a sustainable organization is sort of our goal, and keep
Great.
and that's it. Of course, it's they're never going to reach it 100%, so we just keep making progress every year.
So, does that message resonate with your customers? Is that something they're looking for?
It does to a certain to some it does and some it hasn't come to the stage yet where people choose us because of that, but I think it is a factor that people like. um, but I'm doing it more so because I want to attract people, employees that believe in that and believe in
Mm.
those principles and want to create ideally a better world going forward than we're seeing right now. And so that's really my primary goal. But I would like to work closer with our customers that because obviously your environmental impact, whatever you're doing, is not solely in the control of your own business. And so you have the downstream, so customers and how they what they do with the products, and then of course the upstream, the manufacturing and the delivery and all of that style. So working with these companies, and we've had some interesting meetings with some of the delivery companies about moving more towards EVs in their trucks and things like that.
Mm.
uh, they've already gone hybrid. Most of them have a long time ago, which helped. But still, moving to EV is going to, particularly if they can get renewable energy uh, refilling of their batteries. But yeah, so that's the direction we're trying to go.
That sounds great. Terrific. Well, thank you for sharing all these details about Newport. Yeah, I want to maybe take a step back. You have spent so much time in Japan, I mean, literally decades here, and I'm sure you've had a million different experiences. Some are probably terrific, some are not so great. Can you tell me a little bit, maybe the good, bad, and the ugly here about your time in Japan?
Um, I, I think that probably I think the good side is the people you meet, and it's one thing that I think if you get off the beaten path, which I often did in early days and still do today to a certain extent, although it's harder because people are everywhere, foreigners are everywhere. But you have these wonderful interactions. I've always I've traveled a bit in Europe, and you go to places like France or Paris or London, and you just see these beautiful vistas and these wonderful these huge old buildings and you come to Tokyo and you started going, well, there's all these buildings, but it just doesn't really hold together from a big point of view, from a massive point of view. But if you go down and you're walking along this little street and suddenly this little tiny park is there. And the park, and someone decides they want to grow flowers there. And so there's a beautifully kept flowers that maybe a neighbor that just wants to keep, doesn't have room at their house, and they keep these flower beds going. And it's those kind of experiences, I think. And nothing that's, they're just, I guess, in the totality of all these little experiences you run into it. Maybe it's an inn you stay at, a hot spring inn somewhere, and you start a conversation with the with one of the people working there, and they're telling you their history and where they're from. um, I remember when I was working in the inn in Nozawa, and so most of the staff at the inns in different places were actually farmers, from up in Aomori and Akita and places like up northern Japan because there was no work in the winter. So they come down to the ski areas where there's work. And so you have these great conversations with people that had been basically living in some small town in the middle of Tohoku and the whole different life and a very different experiences. So that's probably been the most interesting side of it. I think that from the good side, you know, I think there's also like any culture, there's aspects about Japanese culture. It's it's you're never really going to be Japanese, and no matter how long you've been here or how well you speak Japanese, you're still going to be my Gaijin friend, not my friend.
Mm.
um, and so I think, but it isn't meant in a way of trying to be demeaning to the relationship, but it does make you realize. Maybe it's not happening as much these days, but I in the old days when I was here in the 70s, it was it was always you were called, gaijin da wherever you went, even places that were fairly in French in the city, and so you were always sort of marked as being different, and and you'd be sitting in a train, and the last seats to be filled were the ones next to you,
Mm.
and so it was these kind of things they kind of felt, maybe I don't belong here, but it was never. I didn't really feel. I just felt a little bit strange sometimes on those kind of experiences. But I did. Obviously, you make great friends here, and it's part of the culture. So I'm not Japanese, and I would never will be Japanese. But it doesn't mean I can't live here and create a great life and have great friends and have a wonderful experience.
I'd agree. That's great to hear that. Also, another thing in the remaining amount of time, this has gone so quickly. I want to make sure that we don't skip over this. You have literally been there, done that. You have founded a company. You gave us all this sorts of background information, which is terrific, and taken advantages of many different opportunities. There are lots of younger people that listen to Real Gaijin's podcast and also subscribe to Real Gaijin Substack that are very interested to live and work in Japan. Now, there's some concern about low wages in the country right now, but besides that, there seems to be just more or less a lot of interest in Japan, not just to come visit, but to actually have some sort of maybe even form a business like you did, but at least have some work experience here. Can you give some advice to an aspiring would-be person that wants to come to Japan from outside the country?
Oh, I think Japan's a great place to work and to get experience. I think, fortunately, Japan has opened up on their visa granting to
Mm.
a much wider variety of jobs. So when I first came here, actually, I was when I first arrived, came here in '73 after graduating. Um, I had applied for a visa to work at a small school in Yokohama, and my visa was denied because they already had another foreigner working there, and there was only they only would allow one foreigner to work at that school, and so it was very hard. So when I came here, actually, I came in a tourist visa, and then I got a job at the Navy base in Yokosuka. And in those days, I'm not sure if it's still the same. So people working for the military, both soldiers and civilians, uh, get a visa called the status of forces visa. And so I was able to switch my tourist visa to status of forces, and I worked in the Navy Exchange in Hong Kong, in Yokosuka as a forklift driver. So one of my many skill sets.
We skipped over that one. Yet another experience. Okay.
And so and then 3 months later, I was able to find another school that would give me a visa, and so I switched my status of forces to a working visa with this school. So the visa is open up a lot, but I think there's, first of all, there's low labor here. That there's very few people we can hire in Japan. And so it's very hard
Mm,
to get people. So there are lots of jobs available, but as you said, a lot of those jobs are fairly low paying.
mm,
Um, and so it might be hard to you know to live that well on the kind of salary you get for a lot of these jobs. But the experiences will be valuable.
right.
And there are a lot of foreign companies here, and some of them might have positions that would allow you to perform sort of interesting jobs without having strong Japanese language skills. But
Oh,
I think language is important, though,
mhm,
getting some language skills. So I would recommend strongly that people, if you want to come here, start working on your Japanese. Although I know AI now you can almost get simultaneous translation that is decent. But working through you know a cell phone back and forth, going back and forth, a cell phone between you is not the same as having a conversation.
of
And
course.
so I would recommend as quickly as possible get to a certain level of Japanese. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. But what I mean, I totally agree with you. The other thing, though, that I'm hearing is, and I've listened to now over the past 45 minutes, you have taken virtually every opportunity that you were given, tried it, and then leveraged that to pivot to something else where necessary, which is also pretty good advice to be open.
Yeah, I tell people that I quite often, actually, a couple of days ago, there was a part-time MBA class that was here from USC that I spoke to, and one of the things that I always say to people at coming out of university, if you know what you want to do, great, go do it. I didn't, and so I take the opportunities that present themselves, and even to me, I think a lesson I learned when I first came to Japan on that 1971 trip and went throughout Asia, throughout Southeast Asia and South Asia, was that you get out of your comfort zone
Mhm.
and get off the couch and go do something. And getting out of your comfort zone, it brings life, it makes it alive. I think everyone, if you read anything about the mind, realize we operate on autopilot most of the time. Is we got to save that energy for more important things in our brain. So, and that happens when you're in a very comfortable area. You're sleepwalking through things. You take the same route to work every day. You
Mhm.
get the same car, the train every day, and breaking that up in different ways is fantastic. It makes you start realizing. It makes you come alive, I guess. And Japan, you go to a supermarket in the U.S. and you're probably sleepwalking through it. You go to a supermarket in Japan, you're trying to figure out what things are.
That's good. That's absolutely good. Very good advice. Say, by the way, how do you manage the requirements that your job and your business ownership requires with having a life, so to speak, to having a life outside of work?
I think I was, I didn't start my company until I was in my 40s. So I had, and one thing I advise people about starting, I guess June started earlier, but I advise people to learn on someone else's dime. Be
Mhm,
an employee of a company and just learn as much as you want, as much as you can. And I remember reading an article about a fellow that was talking, he didn't do it, but talking about a colleague of his. They both had a summer job at McDonald's. This is something I read, so I don't know where it was exactly. And he said he worked the summer job, got paid, didn't really enjoy the work very much, but fine. 3 months later, he said his friend basically was so interested in learning about how McDonald's operated, he convinced the store manager to let him do every job in the store for those 3 months. Everything from getting the shipment in the morning to picking the things up to cooking to working the register to cleaning up afterwards. He wanted to learn everything about, in that 3 month period, everything about how McDonald's operated their store. And two people same age, take a whole different experience. They came the same wage. They didn't get different wages, but one came away with basically an experience. Well, I worked there. It was okay. To one that said, now I know how McDonald's operates.
Mm.
And that sort of is to me a lesson people should take. Whatever you're doing, even if it seems like pretty boring job, try to learn as much as you can about you know how the company operates, why they're doing what they're doing. Talk to the CEO, and learn as much, and then that information will be very valuable later on.
That is fantastic advice. Very good. Very well put, too. Thank you very much. Before we go, I want to ask you, though, since I know you like to travel, can you give me a couple different possible hidden gems in Japan that people might not find out about in the internet or through a guidebook?
But if I tell you, then it won't be hidden anymore, then, right?
Well, okay, yes, but exclusive benefit for the listeners here. Okay.
Uh, I like all aspects of Japan, a different place. I really enjoyed a trip we took to Shikoku, which is one of the islands in Japan, and basically we just we rented a car and drove for the whole family. We drove around to every major city there, and but also stopped in some of the hidden onsens. And I don't have any. I've forgotten some of the names, but Shikoku, it's not as traveled as some of the other places are in Japan. At least it didn't used to be. It wasn't a few years ago. And so you'll have some interesting experiences there, and you just walk into these things. I just, to me, you just pick a direction you go, but don't follow the normal guidebooks. Go
Mm.
places, and it's amazing the kind of experiences you have. So that's my recommendation.
All right. Well, that's very good practical advice. Get off the beaten track. That's great. Very good. Kevin, it is time for us to end the call. It's amazing how quickly this went. But for any of people that are listening in, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I know for us, we're used to Zoom. Substack operates a little bit differently. We can kind of scroll through this as we're going on our phone, but it's a little difficult to see. I don't see any specific questions here, but I appreciate all of the practical advice. Kevin, I've always enjoyed our conversations on many different continents we've met
That's
at this
right.
point,
That's right.
and also through the friendship of our two sons that have gone to middle school, high school, and college together. I'm sure we'll stay in touch. I guess one other thing is, when am I going to see you down here in Kyushu?
Well, hopefully soon. So the weather's getting warmer here, so maybe we'll head down in a couple of months. So we'll see. And before it
All
gets
right.
hot down there, I guess it's getting hot in Tokyo already. So
Okay, good. Yes. Well, you can come on down via Shikoku if you drive or take a
bit far to
ferry.
drive, I think.
Okay, great. Well, Kevin, we are at the end of our time, so I will uh, cut you off now. Not to cut you off totally, but how can we stay in touch with you? Is it best to just check out Newport online?
Yeah, that's probably best. There's a contact thing there that you can
Okay,
send a note and just make a note that's addressed to me. Yeah.
great. Okay, I'll put that in the notes when we summarize today's talk. Also, of course, for everyone who joined during the call, you've already listened, but we will be putting together a recording of this video call, and I'll try and summarize some of the key points and put that out. Maybe give me a couple days to get that done, but therefore, others that might not have been able to join today can listen in at their convenience. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your vast experience, a little bit of it at least. I'm sure it was great for all of our listeners. I certainly enjoyed hearing it too.
Thank you, Mark. I really enjoyed it. Okay.
Okay.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
good day. Have a good
Okay.
rest of your Sunday morning.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Goodbye,
See you.
everyone. Thank you for
Bye-bye.
joining. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching and or listening to another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts on Real Gaijin. Tell us what you think and be sure to tune in again next time.